Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Well, I am going to get started. We will have some people joining us later, I imagine, but we are also recording this session so that we're able to share it out. So I just want to start by saying thank you so much for joining us today. This is first of a Lunch and Learn series that we will be hosting in our community. And this is the world's largest conversation about mental health today. That, it's led by Canadians at home and around the world. And every time you hashtag Bell Let's Talk or use any of the social media outlets and watch videos, you will receive the goodwill in knowing that Bell is donating 5 cents to mental health. So this year's mental health campaign for Bell's Let's Talk is encouraging everyone to keep listening, keep talking, and keep being there for each other. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement, saying that the land on which we're broadcasting from today is situated on the lands traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today. We are all treaty people with a responsibility to honor all our relations. And I know myself, I will continue to be on a truth and reconciliation journey to do my piece. For the next event that's coming up on February 24th, I just want you to mark your calendars. We're asking folks to join us behind the scenes in one of our classes. So for diversity, equity, inclusion, and allyship. So this is a free session. This is one of our regular leadership days. So if you've always wondered what we've done in class or you miss attending class, please join us. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. And this is a day where we're really going to choose courage over comfort and have some great discussion. Now, why are we here? It is my pleasure to introduce to you Nicole Schiener. Nicole is an award-winning registered psychotherapist, published author, and social justice advocate. She provided group counseling and supervision at a local nonprofit mental health agency for 20 years. She sat on numerous regional committees and is a graduate of Leadership Waterloo Region, class of 2016. Nicole's been featured in local media and has presented locally and at all provincial and national conferences. Her virtual private practice and consulting business, Peace and Possibility, launched in the fall of 2021. And it provides customized trauma-informed mental health and wellness presentations to organizations and online sessions across Ontario, as well as walking sessions along the Grand River, with a focus on supporting new and working mothers to prevent or recover from burnout and thrive. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and welcome everyone. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so I want to start off with a little bit of a poll just to get a sense of where people are coming from in terms of their roles in organizations. So I think Bethan's going to help with that. And so we just want to get a sense of I think I might have to All right. I'm not sure if it's going to show up somewhere.
I just saw in
I
the
can't
chat,
see
Beth
it.
said 1 second, so she must
Oh,
be
okay.
having
Okay, no problem.
some
No
technical
problem.
holdback.
All right. So while we're waiting for that, I just want to sort of recognize that people may be coming, carrying different roles. And even those of you that are in leadership and that I'll be speaking to about how to support employees, I also want to recognize that, you are human beings and that you have your, your own experiences. So I'm holding that kind of dual awareness of the many roles that you may be playing. So were we able to do that, or should I just move on? I can't.
I'm not sure. Bethan, should Nicole just pick up from where she left off?
Diane, can you just log out of the session for a quick second for me, please?
Okay, I'll just go. I'll just carry on. The joys of technology, right? So this is basically what I'm going to be focusing on today, and I don't have a lot of time, so it's really just an introduction and an invitation to kind of continue on in the small groups at the end to share about lessons learned as well as struggles that that you might have. So we're going to talk about just some of the key findings that are coming up in terms of impacts from the pandemic. I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma and trauma-informed approach, and then just share with you some things that escalate the threat response and some things that help to create safety and trust. And then, of course, give you some tips for discussing mental health at work. All right, so we're going to just skip that part. Okay, so in the chat, if you want to share the first 3 words that come to mind when you reflect on the impacts of the pandemic on yourself personally and professionally. I just want to get a sense of everyone's lived experience and shared experience. So if you can take a moment. Okay, so I'm seeing tired, sad, hopeless, isolation, anxiety, stress, grief, anxiety, feeling lost, self-reflection, reevaluation, family, isolation, technology, fatigue, stress, fatigue, missing hugs. So thank you, and you can continue to share. But what I want to remind you is that you're not alone. And as I mentioned, everything that I'm speaking to, we're holding the experience for how people that we are supporting are experiencing as well as our own experiences. And that can make it even that much more difficult. So overall, employees are reporting that they're feeling burnt out, overworked, and underappreciated. Right? And that was echoed in some of the comments in the chat. So people are leaving jobs, what we refer to as the Great Resignation, in record numbers right now. And what they're seeking is personal well-being and better work-life balance. Now, I know that a lot of employers are in sort of a double bind situation where you're aware that your employees need time off, need less hours, not working more hours, and yet there is a shortage in terms of resources. And so that can be really challenging. And so what we want to look at is there any contextual issues that we can address, as well as is there any things in terms of how we set up the work environment that can help to make people feel more appreciated and feel more supported. Okay, so Ariana Huffington says the Great Resignation is really a great reevaluation. What people are resigning from is a culture of burnout and a broken definition of success. Now, some of you may not know that Ariana Huffington herself experienced burnout prior to creating Thrive Global and was actually hospitalized for that. And when she talked about success, she talked about this focus on kind of climbing the corporate ladder focusing on accumulating wealth and really forgetting about the third metric, which was the physical and emotional health and well-being. And that's kind of where Thrive Global was born out of. So if we look at more on a contextual level, specific populations that are particularly been affected by the pandemic, we can see that mothers, single mothers, racialized mothers in particular, many have had to leave their jobs because of caretaking responsibilities. And those that are trying to juggle work and family life are often expressing feeling stressed and not having enough time to complete all the tasks that are being expected of them, and also being fearful that they're going to lose their jobs because of time that they have to take off to care for loved ones. And so we're seeing a rise in mental health issues, in particular for mothers. Also, there is one article that I looked at where they talked about how members of equity-seeking groups, people who are racialized or part of religious minorities, they're reevaluating their jobs and looking for workplaces where there is not microaggressions happening, where they're feeling safer and they're feeling more supported. And even that term microaggression minimizes the experience that can be very insidious and create a lot of harm. And so when people were at home, they were able to see the contrast. Some things that, you know, in organizational cultures where it had been minimized or ignored, and that was contributing to mental health experiences and trauma for individuals, and that wasn't being addressed. So I've included some articles, and the slide, if you'd like a copy of it, you can just send me an email, and I've got my email address at the end, but it's just peaceandpossibility@rogers.com. And maybe Bethan or Diane could put that in the chat for me. But so there's a couple of articles here that talk about microaggressions and racial trauma and how that has a direct impact on mental health. So just for the people here today, just wanted to get a sense, how many of you have experienced what we would consider burnout? So this really significant decreased energy, focus, motivation, your general coping strategies that you use aren't feeling enough. And often it can mimic sort of experiences of depression in terms of that low energy. So if we're able to do a Zoom poll, and if not, that's okay.
Hi, Nicole. The Zoom poll feature is unfortunately not functional right now. I can't seem to get it to work. My apologies.
Okay, no problem, no problem. So one of the things that's really important when we think about trauma and mental health is that people can be traumatized by any event they perceive, and that's the key. They perceive it, consciously or unconsciously, to be life-threatening. And so it can be different for different people depending on their own experiences and the resources that they have, and or the trauma that they may be carrying already on a generational level or historic level. So one of the reasons why I believe teaching trauma-informed practices to organizations is so important right now more than ever, whether or not the population that you serve has been identified as trauma survivors, because this global pandemic has been and is like a collective trauma. The effects of that are going to vary depending on individuals, but we've had increased cues of danger, less cues of safety and opportunity for connection, conflicting information that leads to division and fear, lack of control, and unprecedented loss. And I know in my experience working with clients is that these current conditions trigger past losses and past traumas. And then in addition to that, you have what's sort of been dubbed the shadow pandemics. the rise in violence against women, the increase of racial violence, exploitation and abuse of children, addiction, mental health issues rising, and of course, the homelessness crisis. And so within your organizations, you likely have individuals who've experienced any number of these things, or may be experiencing vicarious trauma as a result of knowing someone or being connected to a particular, identifying with a particular group. And so all of that is impacting us on a nervous system level. It's affecting us emotionally, physically, mentally. And in turn, of course, that's then going to affect how we show up to do our work and our vulnerability to mental health issues. So trauma negatively impacts our coping skills and our adaptation to everyday events. One of the things that trauma does is it makes it harder for us to focus and concentrate, to problem solve, to think creatively, to engage in holding multiple perspectives, and to be able to connect with others. So you can see all of the different ways that it can negatively impact our ability to do our jobs, not to mention connect with coworkers, clients, customers. So when services are not trauma-informed, we can unintentionally re-traumatize or exacerbate symptoms. So one of the areas that I think is really important to look at as organizations and as leaders is being aware of things that can escalate the threat response. And that essentially is when we are then activated in our defensive patterns. So fight, flight, freeze, which turns our cognitive processing offline. So lack of information, uncertainty, loss of control, helplessness, conflict, emotional isolation. So as you think about those things, I want to invite you to think about if there's any practices in your workplace that trigger your threat response. Now, sometimes we can be triggered because of a historical trauma, and there's a similarity in some way to the person or the environment, but other times it can be things that are happening in our environment that are creating us to feel either emotionally or physically unsafe. And our brain doesn't distinguish between the two. So when we feel emotionally threatened, it is registered as just as significant as if we feel physically threatened. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of people saying yes. Okay, so yes, I think to the burnout question. I'm just seeing that now. Does anybody want to share? And you can unmute yourself if you want, a practice at your workplace or in the chat that has triggered your threat response. So one thing that I have noticed and that I think is really important for leaders to pay attention to is emails. What is communicated in an email when it's communicated can be highly triggering for people. So we need to be really mindful about our communication style and coming back to, again, what examples trigger threat response, such as lack of information, conflict, getting an email in the middle of a day about funding cuts or, major changes to a procedure or policy can be highly triggering. And so especially if you are in a role where you are expected to sort of bring your calm presence. So for myself in a helping profession, I need to be regulated in order to offer that co-regulation. So if I'm taking in emails that are highly stressful, that's going to have an impact on my nervous system. So there's things that we can do individually in terms of deciding when to check emails. And then there's things on a leadership level that we can also take into consideration in terms of how we create those emails, when we send those emails, what information should be really getting sent or shared in a meeting as opposed to in an email. And being mindful of people's time and what it, how that may impact them. So that's one example. Invite people to think about. Just going to see if we've got, okay. Yes, how many emails, how much information, being overloaded. Yes, absolutely. A vague email about a request to meet about your workload in 2 days is triggering. You spend 2 days worrying. Yes, exactly. So that lack of information, right? And if we're already feeling vulnerable for a variety of reasons. So for example, going back to the example of mothers worried about losing their jobs because of extra time that they were taking off. And I've certainly had clients with mental health and physical issues that were worried about losing their jobs because of time off, right? If you get a vague email like that and you're already feeling vulnerable and worried about, your security within your job, that can be highly triggering. So that's a great example. Okay. So the difference with trauma-informed organizations is that policies, procedures, and practices are created in a way that reflect a much larger understanding. So the psychosocial, biological, physical, and cognitive impacts of trauma. And as I said, not just looking at the people that we serve, but also the people, the staff within the organization. And so there's an emphasis on safety, belonging, and contextual understanding. So I've said 4 things that trigger our threat response. So now let's look at 4 things that can create safety and help to foster trust. So clear expectations. As Brené Brown says, clarity is kind. And so making sure that there is those clear expectations, clear communication that comes up over and over again. That's going to help to alleviate some of that stress. And empowerment is huge because one of the hallmarks of trauma is that lack of control or that lack of power. And we're all feeling it right now with the pandemic and so much of our power being taken away. So as an organization, we want to think about how can we empower staff? How can we give opportunity for choice, for input, for flexibility? Excuse me. And respect is huge. And it's not just about how we communicate in terms of the respect that we show, but also respecting people's time. That is a huge one that's coming up in terms of people leaving, right? It's they want more of that work-life balance. They need more time. And it's not selfish. We only have so much capacity. And if we are constantly being bombarded with messages outside of our regular work hours, or if we're constantly having to put in overtime, there's no time to refill that cup. And you can only go so far when you're running on empty, right? A culture of appreciation helps to offset that need for people to work more, right? When staffing is limited, people want to feel recognized and appreciated and valued and celebrated. And we're seeing people who were sort of the high achievers or high producers, they're burning out as well. And part of that is, if they're going above and beyond and not getting recognized, you get to a point where you think, what is the point? Right? We need that, right? We need that. We need that feedback. We need that encouragement. We need that support. And then connection is huge because trauma happens often in connection and it impacts trust. There's been a disconnection with the physical distancing, and healing happens in connection. Right? It's a co-regulating. It helps our nervous system when we're able to play and have fun and share jokes and laughter. It's healing for our nervous system and come together. It helps to foster that sense of belonging and safety, which is so critical. Because when we're in that safe enough, connected space, then we get our frontal lobe online. We're able to think creatively. We're able to problem solve. We're able to make repairs, to hear different perspectives, to engage in the processes that are necessary for building trust. So, any thoughts or comments about that? Oops. My finger slipped. Okay, just check in the chat here. I like the idea of creating a culture of appreciation and celebration. When we're not in the office, people may not receive that immediate appreciation, feedback, etc. Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think it's one of the ways, especially if you're not working in your office, it's one of those ways to help feel connected. And, you know, giving and receiving, both giving and receiving gratitude feels good, right? So it's a win-win. And we actually release neurochemicals that are different from the neurochemicals that we release when we're feeling anxious. So you can't feel anxious and grateful at the same time. So it's a wonderful way to help your nervous system and help combat, you know, some of the impacts that are being thrown at us from this pandemic. Okay, so trust. We look at trust from an attachment perspective. The big question is, are you there for me? And one of the big things that is coming up is that for organizations to thrive and to retain employees, there really needs to be more focus on relationships, secure relationships where people are feeling safe and valued. So this is one of the ways that we do that is through building trust. Trauma erodes trust. So rebuilding that trust is so important. So empathic listening. I see Ben raised his hand. Do you want to unmute yourself? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. Yeah, our agency's, one of our values is celebration, but I think that's something that's been lost over the pandemic. Just, I wrote it in the chat, yeah, just we're not in person, so celebrating over Zoom isn't the same as celebrating in person and all these things. And one of the things that our leadership team is trying to do is in the month of February, because February seems to be like a tough month in general, but you know, during the pandemic, probably amplified. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on things that we can do, because our leadership team is committed to a half day a week to be together, or in some form, like whether it be an online kind of game night or game afternoon or something, or it's all during work hours, or going for a walk or something. Are there other things that other agencies have been doing, or if you have any suggestions on how to create this culture of celebration and appreciation, I guess?
I think those are great ideas. And I love the idea. I was going to say going for a walk, I think is so important, right? Because you can physically distance, but still be together, and then also get the benefits of nature. I think still, like, even though it's not the same through Zoom, I think it still feels good to be recognized. So I would encourage that. Does anybody else have anything that their organization is doing? If not, we're going to leave some time at the end for small groups and for some sharing that way. But is there anybody else who wants to share, has something that they found helpful for increasing that sense of connection and celebration? Okay, if I'll keep an eye on the chat and see if anything else pops up. Okay, so empathic listening, and again, this is where it's really important for us to be grounded in our safe, connected space, because empathic listening is about opening up with our heart as opposed to just being in our head. And this is what allows us to connect on that level, and that's what allows people to really feel heard, and that sense of validation, which is not necessarily that you agree, but that you are hearing them and that what their experiences make sense for them. A big piece around trust that I see in organizations that can get eroded is when there is not the consistency and the follow through. I see there's somebody in the chat. Oh, okay. Just a message. So example of that would be diversity, equity, and inclusion training. If it's just a one-off training and there's no follow-up conversations and there's no actual systemic changes that are put into place, that can actually erode trust, especially for groups that were already feeling unsafe or experiencing microaggressions. So want to be really careful that if you're going to bring a talk or a speaker in to talk about something like this or set something like that up, that there's a bigger conversation, an ongoing conversation happening about how are we going to create change on that systemic level, and how are we going to allow for follow-up conversations to make sure that this is an ongoing piece and not just something that's kind of getting checked off the box, right? That it's really connected to that. This is an organizational value that we hold. So ideally, our intent and our impact is going to align, and that builds trust. When that doesn't happen, which can sometimes happen, then we want to have that accountability, right? We want to have that accountability that is not about deflecting or blaming the other person, but about taking responsibility and then showing with action that you've heard that person, you've learned, and that you're putting changes in place. And so that piece is really important for building trust. So I'm going to save this one for in the small group discussion in terms of practices in your workplace, but you can also share in the chat as well. And I will invite some, I'll read out a few of those if you want to add any practices that foster safety and trust. So we move into talking about mental health in the workplace. This person was actually in an example in a book called Option B by Sheryl Sandberg. And she is a leader at Facebook. And she was talking about this particular leader actually ended up with a fairly significant diagnosis of cancer. And what she discovered was when she was more open herself personally about her journey, allowed herself to be vulnerable, that invited and allowed the people around her to also open up more personally, but also professionally in terms of not being afraid to share when they were struggling or they had made a mistake or needed help. And so it's this idea of modeling the way being so important as leaders. Okay, I'm just seeing something here. At our organization, we have full staff Zoom meetings every second week. We start every meeting with doing a check-in. Every person takes 1 to 2 minutes to say how things are going with them and share their feelings. One of our first agenda items is asking the group if there are any recognitions, kudos, or appreciations anyone would like to share. We always have 2 to 4 recognition shout outs that are done, which is really positive. We are a small organization, so this piece usually only takes 20 minutes. Okay, that's great, yeah. All right, so again, I'm gonna leave this with you, and as I said, I'm happy to email you a copy of the presentation. This just invites you to reflect on your own journey in terms of either sharing your mental health experience and did that go well for you? And if so, what helped? And if it didn't, what didn't help? Because we can obviously learn from that. And or in a leadership role, how comfortable are you talking with employees about mental health issues? And we want to bring up any assumptions, judgments, unconscious bias, because we can't change what we don't know, right? So the first stage of change is always awareness. So these things are not helpful when we are discussing mental health issues. Okay, no news is not always good news. So let's not assume just because people aren't sharing with you that everyone is fine at your organization. On any given week, 500,000 Canadians are off work due to mental health issues. So we want to be proactive. But also, if we're not comfortable having the conversation, then we may avoid the topic, change the subject, or move into fix it or problem solving mode, which is not helpful either. We also want to be mindful of not asking how someone's doing in a public space, because that doesn't really allow them the opportunity to share what's really going on for them. And so you may not get a clear picture. And then these are examples that I would get into in more detail if I was doing a more detailed mental health presentation, but some of the things that that can get in the way. And this one I think is really key, ignoring the greater context, systemic barriers, or the environment itself. So we don't want it to be, mental health is your problem, the individual problem. We need to hold a greater contextual understanding of what's going on, and a willingness within the organization to look at practices or environmental changes that need to happen, workload changes, whatever can support that person. Because otherwise, what's happening with the pandemic going on for so long and people feeling stretched so thin, that there's almost a resentment and anger that they're feeling when people are suggesting, well, here, take this mindfulness course, or, you should just, you should go to therapy. And it's not that mindfulness doesn't help, and it's not that therapy doesn't help. Those things are helpful, absolutely, because there may be unresolved trauma, or there may be, aspects of the nervous system that need support with regulating. But if that's all that is suggested, that's where you get that pushback, and that's where you tend to get people leaving the organization because they don't feel supported. They don't feel like the bigger picture of what's going on is being understood. So my suggestion is, we normalize that this is a hard time for everyone, while also we look at what systemic contributors, how can this be a we conversation versus a you conversation? And I think that's really important, because otherwise people, as I said, are either going to be resentful or angry, or they're going to be carrying shame about what's wrong with me, why can't I cope with this or handle this, and then things often get a lot worse, and that's what leads to the burnout and the physical health problems, or the escalating mental health issues, because of not feeling safe to ask for the support that's needed and address the key issues. So I think I'm out of time, because we want to leave time for sharing. So there's lots more I could say, but going to stop there. I've got some additional resources on the PowerPoint. And as Diane mentioned, I am available for customized workshops and individual counseling. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. And we're going to leave it. I think I need to stop my share so that Bethan can set up the small groups.
Nicole, did you want to share that last slide and just intro the group conversation topic? The room's all ready to go, so I can kick them off after you introduce them.
Okay, perfect. So we can go back to what I mentioned before, as far as examples of safety and trust in your organization, that you see practices that support that. And then also, just to talk about struggles and lessons learned. So are you an organization that would consider yourself trauma informed? And if so, what kind of changes have you made as a result of that? What's the impact been around that? And if not, just kind of having a conversation about where you might be struggling, and how you think that becoming trauma informed, learning more about that and applying that could help you in your organization.
Terrific. So we'll send everyone into breakout groups now for about 7 minutes. If you need to take off, don't worry about that. Not a problem at all. We will be sending out the recording to everyone who registered to attend today. But if you're able to join us for the group conversations, we'd love to have you. We're looking at, I've just seen a couple folks drop off, so I just need to recreate the groups here. One quick second. If you need anything from us, you just feel free to reach out or come back into this space. Good to move them around. One quick second, and we should be good to go. So we'll see you back here in a couple minutes.
Thank you. Say to close that up.
People are just coming
Sure.
back now. Just 1 second.
Okay. I wonder if people are coming back in, or have they left?
I think they've just left.
Okay. Well, we will talk to Patricia and Julie then, which is absolutely fantastic.
Julie and I had a lovely conversation. We probably would have kept going, but the ticker was counting down on us.
Exactly.
Oh, we have some more folks coming back.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Oh, here comes everyone. There you go.
Great. Okay, Nicole, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before we finish.
Oh, I just wanted to thank everybody for your time. I know everyone's super, super busy, and I know I squeezed a lot in there. I've made a note of my email, peaceandpossibility@rogers.com. And I'm happy to send you a copy of the presentation with all the links and everything for you to follow up with. And just want to thank you for all that you do for our community and wish you all the best. I know this has been a very challenging few years for everyone.
Sure has. Thank you, Nicole. You gave us
you.
a lot of tips and tools. And like I said, I look forward to taking a deeper dive into your slides, which you're sharing with us. And it's just so important to keep the conversation going. So this is another tool in our toolbox. Remember to ask questions, be genuine, and be kind to each other. We will be sending out a follow-up email. In that will be all the information to register for the upcoming Diversity, Inclusivity, Equity, and Allyship Day. Of course, our class members that are on today are already registered. But thank you so much for hosting this, Nicole, and thank you for joining us with this talk. And look for more Leadership Waterloo Region Lunch and Learns that are going to be coming out within the next few weeks. Thank you so much. Have a great
Thank
afternoon,
you.
everyone.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.